Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening everyone. On behalf of the North Africa and Middle East Department of the Dutch Foreign Ministry, I would like to warmly welcome you here. You turned up in great numbers this evening, so that shows the interest you have in this topic. And of course that's not strange, because it has been in the news a lot, and even more. When we started planning this lecture before the summer, of course we could see already something coming, but we can't predict the future. And the situation has only escalated since that time. Now tonight's title of the Henriette van Lynden lecture is Jihad on Our Doorstep, Inside the Minds of Jihadis in Syria and Iraq. My name is Ernesto Braam. Now this week we've seen the US-led coalition with active participation of a number of Arab countries launching airstrikes against ISIS positions in Syria. Now this was a response to the massive cruelties committed by ISIS against civilians inside Syria and also inside Iraq. Now many Arab countries and Western countries, including the Netherlands, are supporting the coalition against ISIS. Now in the media, there have been numerous explanations for the success on the battlefield of ISIS. Some views were contradicting. There are some mainstream views in the media, on television, and on the radio, and in the newspaper. Now tonight we will get some answers to a number of questions I think all of us here together have. One of the questions that we will answer, the experts will answer, not myself, is the actual situation on the ground inside Iraq and Syria. What does it actually look like? What is it for the people who live there? What is their experience? Is it reflected realistically in the media or not? Is it much more nuanced? A second question is, what is actually the appeal of ISIS? What is it that appeals to so many young and maybe also older people who join them in their fight? And the third question is, how should we, that is, Western countries, Arab countries, the rest of the world, respond to those threats by ISIS? What are, in fact, the policy options we all have? Now, our first speaker, we have three speakers tonight who are all experts. I will first introduce the first speaker, and after that I will introduce the others. The first speaker is Ghaith Abdul-Ahad. I had to practice a little bit on the name, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, more or less. Okay. Now he's an Iraqi journalist, works with The Guardian, a British newspaper, and goes to Iraq and Syria frequently. He just came back actually from Iraq, from the front line, so he knows what's happening there. He is, besides being a journalist, writing journalist, also a photographer. So his pictures are published widely in newspapers throughout the world through Getty Images. He has studied, actually, architecture at the University of Baghdad some time back. But then, because of the situation, he explained after, I think, 2003, he felt that he should take another route, and he became a journalist in a very interesting way, but he can explain that himself if he likes. Now he has taken quite a bit of risk to bring the news to all of us, to bring the news and to bring photographs to us. He has been twice or more even a hostage himself in Afghanistan, where he's worked by the Taliban, and he was also detained in 2011 in Libya. Now he has won many awards for his journalistic work, and just to mention one, He won the British Press Award for Foreign Reporter of the Year in 2008. And last year he was also in the Netherlands as a member of the jury of World Press Photo. Now he will talk about the actual situation on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Now first, before I give him the floor, as I always do, whatever will be said by the speakers tonight does not reflect the views, opinions of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Neither does it contradict the views, but I will not say exactly when it does contradict or not. But it's completely their personal views. And I would also kindly like to ask you not to switch off your phones and so, but to switch off the ringtones of all the mobile devices you have on you, because if I hear a ringtone, I will remember that and not give you any opportunity to ask a question during the Q&A at the end. And I have a good memory for that. Those who want to Twitter during the session is possible. You can use a hashtag, which is hashtag HVL, so that's for Henriette van Lynden, Jihad. So HVL, Jihad. It has to be very short, so you have plenty of space to write your own impressions or ask questions. Now, without any further ado, so hashtag HVL Jihad. But I'm sure you remember that after the first time. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Ghaith Abdul-Ahad to a very warm round of applause to take the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to tell a story about two front lines, both of them from Iraq. Both of them I've visited recently, and I think they kind of tell the story of what's happening in Iraq at the moment. Earlier this year in February, and then April, I went to Ramadi. The uprising, the Sunni uprising against the Baghdad government, been going on for months. The fighting was raging. Ramadi had acquired this distinctive Middle Eastern taste of a city under fire. The burnt concrete, the burnt tires, the bullets, the garbage burning. In Ramadi, I met a former Iraqi general who used to serve under Saddam Hussein, and now he was leading a unit in the fighting against the government of Iraq. For him, the war was a big arch, a sectarian arch. They are the Sunnis oppressed, occupied. They are the Sunnis fighting against a Shia dominated by the Iranians. That was the narrative. We spent some time talking. Eventually, when I went out to see his men fighting in the streets, after a few days of fighting, I realized that in Ramadi, in April, there were 14 different parties fighting each other. Of those 14 different parties, the Shia were only one. The rest were Sunni. It was a Sunni-Sunni civil war in Ramadi between Sunnis supported by the government, Sunnis opposed to the government. The general's war in Ramadi was a repetition of many different wars that he had before. He was an insurgent before, again and again. The Ramadi conflict was a local conflict in which different tribes, different elements of the Sunni Iraqi society was and were fighting against each other in a bigger scheme. When I went back to Baghdad, ISIS was still not a dominant issue. In June, Mosul fell, and suddenly ISIS took over the stage as the central authority in commanding the different insurgents group fighting the government in Iraq. Again, a same coalition of forces that was trying to rebel against the central government now coalesced around ISIS. Both the general, ISIS, the Iraqi government, and many different parties would like to tell you that this is one global war happening in the Middle East, that this is a Sunni-Shia war, that this is a war stretching from the gates of Tehran to southern Lebanon, passing through Baghdad and Damascus. What I have seen in the last decade of wars, I've seen a coalition of different local wars. It's a tremendous mistake to think that what is happening in Syria is happening in Iraq, to think that the narrative of the fighting in Iraq is the same narrative of the fighting in Syria. These are a coalition of separate wars coming against each other. In August this year, I went back to Baghdad and I went to the north of the capital where the ISIS attack was stopped by a coalition of Shia militias and of Iraqi government forces, but the Shia militias were the dominant fighting force. Again, there was a prevailing narrative told to me by the Shia militias who have spent 3 years fighting in Syria, defending the regime in Syria. They had already traumatized, already radicalized as Shia in the fight in Syria. Their war was not, again, an international war. They were militias from Diyala, keen on cleansing the villages that is surrounding Baghdad, north and south. These are, again, mixed neighborhoods, mixed villages, Sunnis and Shia. Again, they were trying to cleanse it, and again, they were fighting a local war, a very specified war, but with a big arc and a big name and a big, reach. Everyone in the Middle East at the moment is trying to portray their war as an international war. The reality, it's a local war. The first time I saw a plane bombing my city, I was 5. It was the Iran-Iraq war. And then I saw bombing again in 91, in 2003, and again and again. The fact that, yes, you can send F-16 to bomb ISIS now, and probably you should or you shouldn't, I don't know this. The fact that what I know out of my experience, that if you bomb now ISIS, you may reduce ISIS into this entity that still exists somewhere in the desert, but you will never be able to end what ISIS is, because ISIS is an ideology. ISIS did not come in the last year and a half. ISIS had its roots in the Syrian conflict, had its roots in the Iraqi conflict, out of the occupation of the Iraq, of all these things. This is something we can debate for hours and hours, and we can tell these stories for our grandchildren, maybe. But the issue is, how do we stop this cycle of every 5 years there is a bombing of Iraq or of Syria? And what do you do next? The answer for this question is not from me. The answer is from an Iraqi friend, a Sunni, who lives under ISIS at the moment. And he was describing life under ISIS, boring, there are no schools, there are no hospitals. And he was saying that unless you solve the Sunni issues, unless you let the local forces in Iraq think that they have a stake in the government, unless you allow the Sunnis of Iraq. At the moment, they are Sunnis. The next one may be Shia, so I'm using the Sunnis not but just to explain. Unless you allow the people of Iraq and the people of Syria to own the solution, it will be an endless cycle of violence. We will not come out of that cycle. The immediate, the victims that I've seen of ISIS, of the civil war in Iraq, have been, say, the Shia, the Kurds, the minorities, the different other people. But in reality, what's happening now in Iraq and in Syria, this is a Sunni tragedy, because the Shias I've seen have consolidated their lines, they brought the militias, the Kurds are, consolidating their line. But this is a Sunni tragedy, because it has happened in 2003, when the Sunnis of Iraq decided to ally themselves with radical elements to fight the Americans. It has happened in 2011 in Syria, when again the Sunnis of Syria decided to ally themselves with radical elements. And it's happening again now. Many of the people say, so why don't the Sunnis of Iraq, rebel against ISIS and fight against ISIS and expel them from the cities? For what? What would they get out of this? It's not their war, and it's not your war also. The way they see this conflict is, it's a local conflict. They see ISIS as an element they can use in their local war against the Shia government of Baghdad, which is a very corrupt government by all standards, by the way. So in that war, why do we stretch out our hands to the Sunnis and tell them, come help us in our fight against ISIS? Why? They don't have anything in it. It's a corrupt country. It's, when I described it's a Sunni civil war, a lot of the fighting has happened because of the unequal distribution of wealth. The Sunnis of Iraq are getting their share of the wealth, but it's not going to the streets of the Sunni. It's going to certain elements of the Sunnis that were empowered after, the American occupation. And now it's the same thing is happening again. Another cycle of let's go around, let's find some Sunni elements, some warlords, pay the money to help us in the fight against ISIS. F-16s cannot deliver the solution. You cannot bomb ISIS out of the streets of Mosul. You cannot bomb ISIS out of Aleppo. What you can probably do is find a separate solution, a solution that may last longer, may last for many few years, but in that solution which can deliver a way out of this cycle of violence. To go back to the second front line, the front line around Baghdad, I know our issue is the jihad our door, and our issue is the radicalization at our door, and people will take it as, it's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda. In north of Baghdad, in these villages, that's, the sectarian cleansing that's happening there, I met a new breed of Shia militia fighters. The radicalization that they've been going through was so immense that they were openly talking about ethnic cleansing, about removing villages, about removing the sectarian map of Iraq. In the previous civil war in Iraq, it was two communities fighting, but it was the militias that were fighting each other. Now we have the communities actually declaring that they don't want to live with each other. The guys I've met there, as were described to me later by a Shia politician, he was telling me that this is a new breed of militias. Those are the Shia Al-Qaeda. So if we now talking about ISIS as a problem, we're already having along the path, along the line, another war in the next 5 years. Because those militias have been radicalized, have been created because of the civil war in Syria. They will not go and disarm in the next 2 years or 3 years. Those will be seeking another war. They will take their fight into Saudi, into Bahrain, into Yemen, into other places, back into Syria. I guess what I'm trying to say here, that simplifying a conflict is very easy. To say that our problem now is ISIS, we can send F-16s, and sending F-16s is the easiest solution, by the way. Just pick up the phone, send the pilot, bomb a bomb, you feel good, you've done something, it's fantastic. But that is not a solution. That is just postponing a solution for another 2 or 3 or 5 years. So what I come from the front line with my pessimism, the bad news that I bring from the front line, is that this is a very complicated conflict. This is not an easy conflict. This is not a conflict of moderates versus radicals. This is not a conflict of jihadis. This is a conflict of multi-layers, of tribes, of towns, of villages, of identities lost, of identities acquired, of front lines, and things. And it's also not a Sunni-Shia conflict, because in many other places in Iraq, you see Sunnis and Shia living together. They have a problem between the two communities. But this is entrenched powers within the Iraqi society, which I call them the elite. It's like 10,000, include ministers, members of the parliament, generals. Those have their entrenched, interests, and for these interests, they are willing to fight. I go back to the general's fight in Ramadi. When he was telling me about his fight, he predicted many of the fighting that's happening now. He said, now we, the Sunnis, are going to march towards Baghdad. This is not an insurgency anymore. We're not going to blow IEDs we are going to march to Baghdad. We are going to reclaim Baghdad. And he was talking about a nationalist fight, where he said, no, the Islamists will never take part in this fight anymore because we've seen them what they happen. Where is the general now? The general is running a tiny little small faction where ISIS and the jihadis are back into his town. The question that I would like the general to answer me is, what will be his next war? When will he again fight for the streets of Ramadi, and why it's happening again and again? So, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ghaith, for your nuanced picture. I think he broke down the sort of black and white image you often get, but of course not from his newspaper, The Guardian, and not from any of the journalists who are here, of course, all very nuanced. Now we go to the next speaker, which is Shiraz Maher. He's a senior research fellow with the International Center for the Study of Radicalization within the Department of War Studies at King's College in London. Now he also coordinates the research on the Syrian and Iraqi conflicts. And as if that would not be enough, he is also teaching at Johns Hopkins University, and he's written many reports, books and articles. But one particular report on radicalization in the UK, a strategy actually he put forward on how to de-radicalize people in the UK, was described by a government representative in the UK as brilliant. Now he has interviewed Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, and many other organizations, and I think he's well positioned to talk tonight because, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say that, after 9/11 he joined Hizb ut-Tahrir, a radical Islamic group. I saw it somewhere described, but I don't know if that's true, as the political wing of the global jihad. But rest assured, he left 10 years ago. So he's not there anymore. But that means that not many other people, or maybe no one else, is better positioned to describe the process which young people undergo when they radicalize, as we call it, for lack of a better term, and maybe more importantly even, how to de-radicalize, how to come out of that movement, system, idea, or how you would like to describe it. So Shiraz will, from his own experience and from the work he does, because he's a scholar and a renowned scholar, describe to you what the appeal is to people, to young people of ISIS, and therefore I would like to ask you to take the floor.
Thank you very much. And Ernesto, I want to start by thanking the Foreign Ministry for putting this on. Everything you'll see behind you is propaganda, pictures from foreign fighters themselves, and they'll be very much the focus of my presentation today. I also want to start by first of all saying that the research team that I lead is the product of what I'll be saying. This is not just my own work, but really you're getting the input of three minds, and so I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Joseph Carter and Melanie Smith as well, for the contributions they've made to this research. So I think it's quite fitting that I'm following Ghaith in this, because what you find is that journalists tell the stories of big ideas through individuals and through characters. And the role of a research center, really, such as ours, is to try and bring the big data into all of this. And what we wanted to do with the Syrian conflict, and increasingly now the Iraqi conflict as well, was not to tell the story through anecdotes, but was to provide a degree of empiricism, a degree of big data where you could go back to something and say, look, here is the evidence to support this particular view. So what we've done, just very quickly to give you an idea of this, is that we've began to catalog and to monitor and to track the flow of foreign fighters into Syria. We've been doing this for over a year now, and we maintain a database now of several hundred Westerners who are fighting in that country. We collect up to 74 data points of information per foreign fighter. And this is allowing us to build a really sophisticated picture of what matters to these individuals, what motivates them, what they do, and to understand their lives and motivations as a clique, as a cluster of people, and as a grouping. We also undertake fieldwork, so we've traveled out to the region several times. We've met with fighters, not from the Islamic State, but from every other group, Ahrar al-Sham, Jabhat al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army, and so on. And we try and piece all this stuff together. And the final thing we do is that we talk to, and I would arguably say perhaps more than any other research institute, more foreign fighters than anyone else. We have a dedicated phone line that we use through our office to contact these guys. And we keep a constant dialogue going to get a real-time sense of what's happening on the ground and what they want to say. So I'll start very quickly by giving the European picture. Who's gone? Well, we estimate from Europe as a whole, between 2,500 to 3,000 foreign fighters have made the trip out to Syria They haven't all joined the Islamic State, but overwhelmingly, that's who they tend to join, and increasingly so now. Globally, when we look at North Africa, the Gulf, and the world more generally, it gets increasingly harder to give a more accurate figure, but we believe it could be anywhere between 10 to 15,000 foreign fighters, putting together perhaps one of the largest volunteer irregular forces in the modern age that has come together from the jihadist perspective, at least, eclipsing everything such as the mobilization in Afghanistan in the 1980s and everything in between. We've also finally, to wrap this sort of set of stats up, is we've counted individuals from 90 different nations participating in this conflict. And that gives you a sense of the scale of just how truly global this participation is in the conflict. Why do they go? Well, the motivations that we found and the reasons we found have indeed shifted over time. But to sort of break it down into the various categories, you have at the first hand what we call the kind of missionary jihadi. The person who says, look, didn't you see the women and children being bombed by Assad? Didn't you see the oppression that the regime was perpetrating against the people? We wanted to help the civilians. We felt we had to come and defend the people. And so we came and we took up arms. And this was something we heard a lot of towards the end of 2012. Throughout much of 2013, we don't hear it so much anymore. But that was certainly a type of person or character who went out. And he's motivated by what you might call the Ummah consciousness, the idea that Muslims around the world are united through a fraternity of the faithful, where duty, loyalty, allegiance is owed from one Muslim to another Muslim, particularly in times of oppression and injustice. And that message, of course, in the Syrian context, resonated very, very loudly indeed. Then you have what you might call the martyrdom seekers, the people who see this as an opportunity to die on the battlefield, to regard themselves as becoming shaheed, as martyrs, as a shortcut to paradise. And literally what they want is to die in Syria as soon as possible from the moment they arrive. They regard this as the sort of best outcome for themselves. You also have committed radicals, people who have had a long association and history of radical activism, extremist activity in the West for some time, and for whom Syria has presented the opportunity to finally have the fight that they've been waiting to have. And so they go. And then the final group that you might see are the adventure seekers, the criminals. And a lot of these posters actually kind of appeal to those guys. The ones for whom the jihad in Syria is a bit of fun. It's an attempt to demonstrate their masculinity. It's an attempt to enter into what you might call a kind of jihadi summer camp. And the British fighters themselves actually coined this phrase. They said, it's a 5-star jihad. Come now before it gets bad. And they would upload pictures of sweets and candy bars. They would upload pictures of themselves swimming in swimming pools and saying, look, come now. We're living better lives here than we did in London. So there was a sense of trying to motivate people and inspire them around that. In this context, I'll also mention very briefly the importance of social media in all of this. Traditionally, the message from jihadist organization was unidirectional. It came one way. You would sit at home and you'd wait for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to release the next edition of Inspire magazine. And when it came, you'd download it and you'd read it. And it would tell you, do something at home. Build a bomb in your mum's kitchen. This is how you do it. This is how you put it together. But there was no way to really have a dialogue, or an effective way to have that dialogue. And you read about people secondhand. You might read about them in The Guardian. Someone who went out to Yemen, who joined up, became a foreign fighter. It's one guy. And you're not getting a direct feel for this character. You're reading about it through the eyes of a journalist, almost in a sense, sort of making this guy a myth, making them something special. And you think, well, I'm not him. But today, you can have a multi-directional conversation with several foreign fighters. And they're talking to you because they're your peers. They're just like you. And they're saying, look, there's nothing special about me. I could come here and fight jihad. If I can do it, you can do it. Here's how I did it. I came this route. I hooked up with this organization. I came through this particular channel. And so it normalizes the entire process. It makes something which is incredibly alien to all of us, that you would give up your life, that you would go out to Syria, and that you would join a jihadist organization out there in this way. But for them, to have this conversation is to normalize what is pretty exceptional. And it inspires them, and it motivates them, and it gives them also a buy-in to a community already before they go. And not only does it give them the buy-in, it allows them to visualize it. They can see these pictures of their friends, of their comrades, of the life that they're leading out there. So it helps dispel the myths. It helps lower the barriers and lower the cost of participation before you've gone. It essentially alleviates a lot of your concerns. And so it's a very powerful thing, and I think that plays a very important role in this context. So what are the implications of this? And given the time frame, I can only really sort of give you a quick 360, and I'm hoping to have a more in-depth discussion during Q&A. But what are the implications? Well, look, politicians want to appear tough. They want to pander to electorates. And that's one of the most depressing things about this debate, about what to do about foreign fighters in Syria. The key to resolving this issue, to managing down the threat, to preventing people from going, is to be smart. It's not to be soft, but it's to be smart. And sometimes being smart does mean being pragmatic. So the first point to make is that the foreign fighters who go to Syria are not a monolithic group. You can't dismiss them all. Not everyone who goes to Syria to fight is a terrorist. It has to be said, it has to be acknowledged. Of course, a lot of them are. A lot of them engage in terrible, terrible activity when they're out there. They commit terrible crimes. A lot of them practice extrajudicial killings and torture people. But not every single individual that goes is guilty of this. And we need to recognize the nuance that exists within them. As I said, some of them who went out, particularly earlier on to help the civilians, went ostensibly for good reasons. And so there are opportunities here for Western governments to leverage discussions, negotiations with these individuals to build a better picture of what's happening on the ground, because we fundamentally don't know enough about what is happening in Syria. Journalists don't know enough, academics don't know enough, governments and their intelligence agencies don't know enough. And so we need to find better ways to be better informed about what is taking place. The discussion about returnees and what to do about returnees when they come back is not an abstract one. It's not a theoretical one to say, well, forget about it, they're over there, let's pull up the drawbridge and keep them out. They've already come back. In the UK, there are 260 people who have fought in Syria who are currently back in the United Kingdom. In this country, I was told today, there are 135 returnees. So you have this problem right here. It's a belated discussion to be thinking about it now. We should have been thinking about this a while ago. What do we do with people who went? There needs to be a sophisticated de-radicalization program where we work with these individuals, and we don't just view them solely through the prism of a security threat. Are you going to blow something up? But we have to appreciate a lot of these guys will have severe mental health problems. They've been subjected to one of the most brutal conflicts of our time with no support. And so we need to think much smarter about how we build a de-radicalization program that not only wins the trust back of these individuals and seeks to reintegrate them, but it's also one that benefits our societies as a whole by allowing us, as I said, to get a better picture of what's happening on the ground, to understand better who are the people out there that we need to genuinely be worrying about, who are the people out there that are plotting, who are the people out there that are seeking to do something truly dangerous and bad to our societies. And as I say, the final point I want to make here is, of course, there is a contingent that will be terrorists. The best academic studies on this suggest that around 1 in 9 foreign fighters who return from the conflict will become terrorists. Now, that's not the majority, of course, but it's also not so small a figure that it's negligible. It needs consideration, and we need to consider that. I think increasingly over time now, whereas we saw a quite introverted movement that was focused in on itself, it was concerned about creating the caliphate, the khilafah within Syria and Iraq. As the United States has begun military action against it, you're seeing increasing posturing now towards the West, increasing hostility towards the West. So that 1 in 9 figure will be something key to watch over the coming months and possibly years as this campaign endures and potentially as the hostility between the two parties continues to grow. But as I say, and I'll wrap up here, this is an issue that requires us to be smart, not soft. And the issue of the foreign fighters is not one that can be treated as a monolith. Just as Ghaith was saying, the conflict is a conflict within a conflict within a conflict. The same thing is true of the foreign fighters. They are a diverse set of people, and we need to tailor our responses to them as such. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shiraz, for sharing your wide expertise and knowledge with us. You really enlightened us, and definitely myself, on some of the motives, and also the different groups of people who go on jihad, that it's not a monolithic group. So I think that will help. Maybe also the next speaker, who will talk about policy options. And that is Professor Edwin Bakker. I think many of us know him because he is regularly on TV, on different programs, news programs. He is currently the director of the Center for Terrorism and Counterterrorism of Leiden University. He is a guest lecturer at NATO Defense College in Rome. And between 2007 to 2011, he was a fellow of the Netherlands Institute for International Relations, Klingendael, in The Hague. Also made an interesting career switch, studied initially, a long time ago of course, economic geography in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands, for our international audience. He was in Iraq at a particular moment, at the wrong time, at the wrong place, in 1990, when a person called Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait. And then the foreigners who were there, the Westerners, were, let's say, could enjoy the hospitality of the Saddam regime for a bit longer than they had initially planned themselves. So Edwin Bakker had some time to look around in Baghdad and get acquainted with culture and what he saw there. So he's been there at an interesting time. Now he's dealing also with Iraq, but also with other countries, of course, in a completely different moment in time. He has published a lot. He is a prolific writer on terrorism and also particularly on jihadi terrorists, also in Europe. Now he will talk about policy options, and I think also we'll make a little bit of link between the two former speakers. Let's say what happened really on the ground, on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq, and then on the other hand, the radicalization and hopefully de-radicalization of young people in the West, in Europe. Now, I would like to invite you, Edwin, to take the floor and share your expertise with us.
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you for the opportunity also to stand in front of such a mixed crowd, students, journalists, politicians, diplomats, and a lot of people that are interested in this subject, not probably also very worried about what is happening out there, and maybe also the link with the Netherlands and the role of the Netherlands. And I would like to focus on that under this title, dealing with the global issue of foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq, IS, and then policy options and geopolitical implications. I would like to stress that this is, in my eyes, having studied terrorism, international relations, conflict for a long time, one of the most complex issues that I've come across. And I would like to stress the incredible global nature of this phenomenon. Many unprecedented developments, the size of the problem, the international nature and the impact. Next slide, please. People from, it's difficult to read, but Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, thanks a lot, Lebanon, Russia, France, Libya, UK, Australia, so many people have flocked to this area to participate in the fight, joining many different countries. And it has many different aspects. If you look at the range of worries in many countries, it ranges from returnees, it was already mentioned, we have to be very much aware of the different nature. There are many different people that come back from different for different reasons. And that's been a worry in, especially in a number of Western countries, I think, for too long. They were focusing on that, which is a bit of selfish because a lot of things are happening out there as well. Think of the war crimes of maybe more than 3,000 European fighters that are there. That's probably more than, that's about 3 battalions. I think the last time the Dutch sent 3 battalions somewhere, it's probably Korea. So it's a large, large army out there of European citizens that are involved in a fight that includes groups that are committing war crimes, maybe involved, well, ethnic cleansing, then the word genocide pops up already and has been used already a number of times. So very serious crimes. Think of the refugees caused by these conflicts. Not only, and lately we see a lot of pictures from of course, the border with Turkey, but think of all the refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, but also think of second-order refugee problems. I used that picture. You see a man washed ashore at some Mediterranean beach, and there's a civil servant taking note of that. I'm not sure what he's doing, but that's happening also partly because a lot of European countries are very reluctant to accept a number of these refugees, and these people are so desperate that they dare or accept taking these risks, that they wash ashore on our beaches. So the problem is very serious, and there are a lot of second-order effects as well around the globe, because there's another picture of Australia, where just recently an alleged plot by people inspired by or directed by IS or intending to kidnap somebody and behead a person. Well, try to think this happening in one of the European countries or in Australia, what an impact that will have also on relations between communities. So the scale of problems is not only, the most horrible things are happening in Syria and Iraq, but there are a lot of other and second-order effects around the globe. I just, when I arrived here, I saw the latest teletext message from the NCTV that's warning Dutch citizens, and probably the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is agreeing on that, and I hope this is a joint communication effort to warn Dutch citizens when they go to certain places that we have to be aware of kidnapping, etc. So a lot of countries are worried about their citizens, diplomats, military, journalists, aid workers that try to do their work, or people who work in the oil industry. We've already seen some examples of that. And of course the potential of IS attacks, and not only at Australia, looking at Australia or the Netherlands or other places, but many parts of the region, because as explained by also the first speaker, IS is not one particular group. In many ways it's a symbol, a flag, a social movement that builds upon certain frustrations that are widespread, and not only in Iraq or Syria. So it has the potential to spread also to neighboring countries. Then policy options. Well, many countries, I have to say, without being, necessarily want to be very critical about foreign policy, but many countries around the world, also and especially also in the region, have contributed one way or another to this problem. And I think if I had to describe it, it's a lack of a coherent grand strategy vis-à-vis the region, ad hoc and opportunistic policies. And of course the main question is, what's happening today? Does that fall under that category, opportunistic ad hoc, or is it part of a larger idea of what we want with that region? It has been described, and it's not funny at all, but of course some of these texts reflect the impossible or the limitations, let me put it that way, a limitation to deal with the issue. You've got worst best options, you've got acceptable inadequate options, and that's probably we have to accept this. And it's not funny at all, but this is the situation, and there's so many different linkages, alliances, impossible alliances, again, often ad hoc and opportunistic. And also short-lived. And I liked very much the first speaker referring to this cycle of 5 years. Like every 5 years there's new coalitions, new groups that are fighting other groups, and how to break that cycle. And it will limit, of course, the policy options. And I mentioned disagreement until yesterday. I'm not naive. But of course yesterday and the last couple of days there has been some momentum. At least there has been some investment in at least an initiative to do something. But of course the question is it the right thing? We've seen UN resolution on foreign fighters. We've seen this US-led global coalition. And maybe even surprisingly, Osama has tried to build, Obama, sorry. Osama never, he wanted to, but he failed. IS is a lot better at that. But Obama vowed to fight IS and to build a global coalition. And the coalition is growing, and the number of attacks is growing. But will it make a difference on the battlefield? Will it make IS grow? And that's really the question. And let's assume IS will be withdrawn from certain areas, will be defeated on the battlefield. It will never be defeated as a flag, as a symbol, as as a vanguard. But let us assume that will happen. What after? What's the next stage? What's the final stage? What is the goal? I haven't seen anything, any clear statement in that direction. But this is the problem. It's partly part of my conclusion. Doing nothing is not an option in my eyes. Neither is letting the US or Kurds, talking about opportunistic policies, and we're going to arm a non-state actor. I'm very much in favor of the monopoly of the violence of the state, so that this whole suggestion sounds very opportunistic to me. But letting them do the work for others, that doesn't sound like a very smart plan. So we need a bigger plan. But that's easier said than done. And I think we have to be aware of the risks, and there are many. And are we aware of them? I think we're pretty aware of them, but are we also ready to accept them? And some of the risks might be, in this country, a terrorist attack, maybe every year. Are we willing to accept that? Or not? What will happen on the ground? There are potential winners and losers, and in many ways this is a zero-sum game, so some will lose. And who are the winners? Are there among this list winners that we actually are not very comfortable with? The Assad regime, for instance. They might win. They might definitely benefit from the fact that, although allegedly they have had deals with IS not to fight each other too much, but currently IS is a strong opponent, and there's fierce fighting between IS and the Syrian regime. Attacking IS will probably help the Assad regime and will require some liaison with that regime, also with countries that have not accepted that regime anymore. That's a very sensitive issue. What about the Kurds? I think they might gain. Also, I hope, and that's my only hope here, is that the new prime minister in Iraq, Haider al-Abadi, might deliver a genuine and legitimate national unity government, but after hearing the first speaker, I'm not so sure, but let's hope. And of course, US President Obama might gain from this, having been blamed for being too lax, too passive in this whole situation with regard to Iraq. Another potential winner, IS. And I'm, unfortunately, having studied terrorism a lot, looking also at, for instance, how Hamas and Hezbollah have managed to win a war, losing 2,000 people. There is the potential that, yes, there is a lot of successful air raids, but IS will win in the end. Their appeal will grow. We discussed it over dinner. Maybe it might be unifying, it might unify them with some other groups. The appeal of the organization might grow, and I think already we've seen some, I mean, these people are smart. There have already been communiques saying that they have to withdraw from the rural areas to the urban areas. And let's sit and wait and mix with the population and then see what will happen. And IS has the capacity to take a lot of casualties, and they just have to wait and see. They simply have to survive, and if they survive, they win. And we've seen some recent examples, Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, that there is a potential to win this war. Losers, repercussions for participating states, Jordan, neighboring states, including Turkey, the opposition in Syria, or the oppositions in Syria. Will they gain from that? If you look at Barack Obama trying to say that at the same time they're going to foster, they're going to strengthen the opposition. What opposition? And they're not only fighting IS, they're also fighting Jabhat al-Nusra with consequences as described by the previous speaker that will have an impact also on the Netherlands, UK and other countries, because those fighters went there to fight in Syria, and suddenly the war is not over there, but also here. They're also fighting other groups, and where do you draw the line? What groups can be attacked and what not? And then what groups are possibly going to be our partners? That's not very clear, so I'm not so sure if the oppositions in Syria will benefit from this. And of course, civilians in the urban areas, I'm sure they will be used as shield, and you can be sure that one day there will be an attack on a military headquarters, and they happen to change the population and change it for a bunch of students, children, etc. Outside the region, participating Western states might be confronted with increased risk of terror actions. If you look at some of the measures taken in the Netherlands, you have the feeling that suddenly we're at war. because we sent 6 planes to that region. Dutch military forces were given the advice or given the suggestion not to wear the uniform when they go to work. I'm not sure what kind of signal that is. And there was this other announcement that Dutch citizens, when they go to certain places, have to be careful. I'm not sure if that's very clear what you're supposed to do or not. But it shows that, and I think they're right, and I think we should not shy away from this consequence. But it has the potential to increase the risk of terror attacks. We've seen this Frenchman being beheaded in Algeria, it was yesterday, and the earlier arrest in Australia. I think today also actually an Australian military man was harassed on the street. But that's just minor, again, compared to the trouble in the Middle East. That's a nuisance instead of a serious security or strategic security threat. Finally, many other uncertainties and risks. Mission creep, that a mission will start with a number of planes bombing certain things, developing into, I don't know, a mission to support the Free Syrian Army, or boots on the ground, military on the ground, or a state or nation building project. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing or it's a risk. If you, again, listen to the first speaker, maybe we need to do a lot more than just sending airplanes, and we need to have, a larger idea of what we're supposed to do about not only IS, but the situation in general. But there's this risk, and it's not clear. It's clear to all that sending F-16s alone is not enough. Also, coalition breakup over disunity regarding what to do with Syria. What if the local partners, the regional partners, pull out? Then suddenly we're in this Western invasion in the region. How would that settle anything? So there's enormous risk. And then my final remark, and that's, I think, it's not providing answers, but sometimes there are simply no answers in these hyper-complex issues. Sometimes you just have to go in. Doing nothing is not an option. And is it worth the risk? And maybe we should not. And certain risk, especially for a country like the Netherlands, is limited, compared to what's happening over there. So do we, and then there's the basic thing, the Dutch have the choice to stay out? We have this Article 90 in our constitution. I think maybe we have to skip it because we only rarely use that, but that's the article that obliges us to uphold the international rule of law and to support this. And we have a responsibility to protect all these kind of things that come maybe from the Second World War, when we've seen these atrocities and we've said, nie wieder. And if you look at these 2 pictures, and I'm sorry that I have to bring this up, but that's a picture on the right-hand side of the Ukraine in 1941. I think it's Babi Yar. We said nie wieder. We see these pictures. I think the option to say no is not there. But again, what's the bigger plan? And with that important question, I'll probably hand it over back to the chair and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your views, Edwin, and I think you made a lot of interesting remarks, critical also, and that's the way a scholar should be, of course. It should challenge policies. I would now like first to give the opportunity to Shiraz and Ghaith, if you would like to respond to Edwin Bakker. He referred to both of you a number of times, agreeing with you, I think giving you even some compliments. But do you agree with Edwin Bakker agreeing with you? Or do you have any different views?
And actually, I'll start with Edwin's sort of closing point on this, which is, do we have the option or the luxury not to get involved? And do we have the option or the luxury not to do something at this stage? And I think really now we're caught in this position where everyone is finally feeling the urge or the pull, we should do something, we should do something. But I'm afraid it's actually come rather belated. And it's become belated because this has been going on for some time. Assad's been massacring people by the thousands since 2011. And I know we've discussed this previously, but actually for me, the real tipping point came in 2012 during the siege of Bab Amr. And for those of you who follow the conflict, this is an area or district of Homs which Assad essentially crushed in its entirety, surrounded it, choked it, and killed everyone inside, except for those who were fortunate enough to escape through sewage tunnels. And at that point, it became pretty clear that this was a zero-sum game, that Assad was prepared to kill, murder, however many it took, and that if he was going to go down, he was going to take the whole of Syria with him. That's where it was at. Now, that was the moment to intervene. And that was a moment we could have intervened lightly with the light touch that Obama currently wants to use to bomb from the air. If there had been a no-fly zone, if there had been some tactical strikes with the support of the Free Syrian Army, I believe, look, I'm not painting a naive picture here, Syria would not be a bed of roses today. But if you're telling me Syria would look like it does today if we'd intervened, you're living in a fantasy world. It would never be this bad. Now, 2 years on, Islamic State has established a state to all intents and purposes. It has mobilized these huge numbers of foreign fighters. It has heavy weaponry. It has sophisticated fighters within its ranks. These aren't just, we talk about Europeans who have gone, who may have been working in McDonald's last week. But there are lots of Chechens in there, a lot of Bosnians in there with real combat experience, people who know how to fight. If you think now dropping a few bombs is going to do anything other than to exacerbate the problem rather than resolve it, again, you're living in the fantasy world. Now, to do it, you have to put boots on the ground. I'm not saying we should. I'm saying that's the real facts of the matter. So we've constantly been faced by this lack of ambition.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you, because you sort of slipped in a sentence which I think draw my attention. You said, you know, what will help to solve the situation or might show some progress is boots on the ground. Not that I'm advocating it.
Okay, I personally do advocate it.
Sorry?
I personally do advocate it.
You do advocate it.
Yeah, I was just trying not to be controversial.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that? No, it's okay to speak your mind.
Well, I think ultimately, look, how do you resolve this? How do you uproot the Islamic State? You can't uproot the Islamic State without putting boots on the ground. It requires that. Drone strikes, military strikes from the air, this will, as to use Obama's own phrase, it will degrade the capability of these groups, but it doesn't end the fight. If you look at the fighting, even in Afghanistan or Iraq, even with boots on the ground, it was so difficult to begin to unpick terrorist networks. But ultimately, actually, Al-Qaeda has been unpicked in large part, at least the old network. The network that pulled off 9/11 was unpicked. It was unpicked through, again, I'm not supporting the US tactics with what they did necessarily, but it was old-fashioned fighting and getting to these people and interrogating them. And you can see the epitome of that in the fact that it led them to the finding bin Laden. So to now go and try and just bomb the Islamic State and think that's going to resolve it, I'm afraid, is too little, too late. This is a very belated approach, and it's a half-hearted one, and it suffers from a poverty of aspiration by the United States. And really, from my perspective, again, the blame for this lies very squarely with President Obama. He missed the opportunities, and now when he's acting too little, too late, and he actually, to my mind, will now make this problem worse rather than better.
Now, let's just pick on that point. I asked both of you, Ghaith and you, to respond to Edwin, but it might be also interesting if you can respond to Shiraz. And particularly to the point, I mean, where you said too little, too late. So to focus on the too little, you mentioned you advocate boots on the ground. So could you give your view on that?
I mean, my disagreement now with Shiraz beyond any disagreements with the professor, so I will go immediately to Shiraz. I think this idea, and I mean, part of this way of thinking that it's too little, too late, Obama should have done something about Bab Omar, the origin of the problem there. Why should not the Middle East own their solutions? Why? It is an uprising. I mean, if we build this analogy, the problem was in Bab Hum, someone will come say, no, the problem was in arming and equipping with weapons bomb Saudis and Qataris and everyone else and the Iranians, the Syrian conflict. Someone will go back and say, no, it's the Iraqis. We can play this game and we go probably all the way back to the Battle of Karbala in the 6th century. So there is no limit to where the original sin was created in the Middle East. I don't know where the original sin lies. But I think to advocate the problem was Obama did not intervene. I would tell you, 10,000 reasons why the Obama should have intervened. And I think actually they intervened. They intervened in an attempt to social engineer the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring had actual beginning, was very good, was fantastic, was brilliant. I've seen it in Yemen, I've seen it in Syria, I've seen it even in Baghdad. But then to convert an Arab Spring into a military uprising. I've never seen an insurgency so well funded like Syria was. And I would argue that turning a proper revolution, yes, Bashar bombed the people, but I've seen it, some of the pictures here show the atrocities committed by the Bashar. But that is not a duality between, we should have intervened and then it would be less. I think the Middle East should own the problem, should own the solution. You say uprooting ISIS. Well, maybe the Middle East needs to deal with ISIS itself. Yes, ISIS are committing murders, are killing people, but then this has to be a Middle Eastern problem. There has to be, at one point, for the people in Baghdad, in Aleppo, in Deir ez-Zor to say, okay, look, there was this problem and we did so and so to remove it. Now with the bombing of ISIS, say and I agree with you here that this will exacerbate the problem to a certain extent. Can you imagine the level of hypocrisy for someone sitting in Deir ez-Zor to say, okay, now the Saudis are using their air force to bomb northern Syria while we've been... It's this kind of the mind thing that's happening with it. So I disagree with you. I don't think the West should have intervened. I don't think the West should have intervened originally in trying to engineer the outcome of the change in the Arab Spring. Part of the problems, and this may not be a very popular thing to say here in Amsterdam, part of the problem is the West and a large, decided that there is no future for Syria without Bashar. Well, excellent. Now you're playing a chess game and you've already put yourself in a corner. How can you have a solution? I think we should be open to everything. At the moment, we don't have a choice.
Okay. I think plenty of the points, and I'm sure you want to make a few more points. You will get plenty of opportunity for that during the Q&A session, because I see a lot of tweets coming in, so that's good. And those of you who don't know it yet, #HVL Jihad. Similar response as previously.
You want us to be detained at the airport today?
Now we give the floor opportunity. There are two ladies with microphones, and we also have someone upstairs with a microphone. And we'll give the people upstairs on the balcony, because there's dozens of people upstairs, and normally you have to come down, but you can stay upstairs. You can also ask questions. But we first move here. So everyone who would like to ask a question, raise your hand, please. If you do it quickly, you have an opportunity. Otherwise, you lose it. Once you get the mic, please give your name and affiliations. Only questions.
My name is Paul Gebrinner, and I'm unaffiliated.
Good.
Good. At the present moment, we have a United States-led coalition of largely Western powers supported by regional powers. Your suggestion, Shiraz, is that the regional powers should take the lead, perhaps supported by the United States and Western powers. But is it practically speaking and militarily practical for countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which are or were the leading powers in the Middle East, is it militarily probable that these two countries could take a leading role and make themselves responsible for containing ISIS or preventing these humanitarian catastrophes? If it's not practically, militarily possible for them to take a leading role, what other choice does the United States and the Western powers have?
Okay, thanks very much. Very concrete, to the point. It's a good example. Then we have over there a gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Christian Dijmeyer, and my question is for Mr. Bakker.
And you have an affiliation?
No.
Okay.
There's a lot of criticism already on the current plan to battle IS in Syria and Iraq. But I want to ask you how you assess the risk that the international attacks against IS will not destroy it in Syria and Iraq, but will maybe push it to displace itself to other places in the Middle East, North Africa, outside government control, for example, in Libya or Tunisia, Algeria, where a substantial part of their foreign fighters come from.
We take 2 more questions in this round. Here, the gentleman over here.
My name is Daan Putman-Kramer. I'm also not affiliated. There's one factor I'm wondering about in all these conflicts. That's the role, the role of the international arms industry, the military industry complex. I mean, lately we heard that IS got access to big arms depots, and that gave them the ability to step up quite substantially their actions. And I just wonder if that's also a point to look at when drawing up policies.
So look at the arms supplies.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. One more, we take it from upstairs. Is the mic somewhere close to, yeah? So who would like to ask a question upstairs? Oh, all the way there. We take it in the next round, but you can already go there.
Yeah, I can go there.
We take one from down here. Here, that side, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Meerte Toppe. I have no affiliation either. My question is for Ghaith Abdul-Ahad. I hear you talking about how there should be a Middle Eastern solution to this problem and emphasizing the local aspects of the conflict. For me, it raises very much the question about the role of the Iraqi state, and I was hoping that you could elaborate a bit more on the role of the Iraqi state, and do you think that the current Iraqi government will, to what extent do you think it will be able to effectively fight IS? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll first handle these questions. Shiraz, you had a question on regional powers should take the lead and whether that is practical, militarily, politically, etc.
Actually, that's not what I was saying. I think that was Ghaith's point. I don't think the regional powers should be taking the lead. I think the United States has to take the lead because the regional powers are fundamentally incapable of doing so. They also lack the will to do so. And I think practically they can't do it either. They would themselves exacerbate the problem. Saudi's backing one side, Iran is backing the other, Qatar's backing the same side as the Saudis against the Iranian interests. So for them to get involved is actually seen as moving from this sort of indirect, tacit support for the conflict into a direct footing. I mean, of course, they are doing that to some extent now, but they're doing that under the umbrella of a United States-led action. And these are not countries that have really ever fought wars before. So the idea that they will do something here or that they will act in the best interests of the region or will be able to uproot the Islamic State, I'm afraid, it is not a practical one. I think it is great in theory, and I think it is a great soundbite to say, let's have a regional solution, let's see an Arab-led initiative, but at a practical level, it fails in every way.
Well, maybe Ghaith could pick up on that? And
yes, see, sorry,
yeah.
Apologies. I never advocated a Middle Eastern powers-led military operations, and to answer the question from the beginning, to say, see, I was bombed personally by the United States from 1991 till now. I've been living in cities bombed by the US, and I don't think the radicalization of my fellow countrymen has been, going down by the bombing. In 2001, I couldn't find one Iraqi who supported 9/11. Now, I mean, it's probably a national saga, 9/11. Everyone kind of celebrate that. So the more you bomb, the more you radicalize. And that is the problem. What I'm advocating is no Western, I agree with Shiraz. I mean, regional powers, Saudi is bombing northern Syria, is just kind of a joke. The question is, why don't you divide this? Why you are playing the ISIS game? Everything we know about ISIS is coming from ISIS. This is their game. They want you to play it. They want you to go there. They want you to bomb. Don't play their game. Just divide the conflict, divide it and fragment it into a tiny little conflict that it is. Solve the Sunni problems of Iraq, solve the Sunni problems of Ramadi, solve the Syrian problem in one way or another, boots, no boots, I don't know. But that is the problem. This is a very easy narrative. I have heard it so many times. Let's send the United States, bring the solution, something. This is a false analogy. This is an analogy you've been drawn into by ISIS itself. ISIS is thriving now. If you see the Twitter sphere, if you see, people in Baghdad and Ramadi who hated ISIS are now kind of have to take choices. Jabhat al-Nusra took choices. So why are you playing their game? Why don't you try to think in a bigger picture and solve the tiny little problems?
Then there was another question. Yeah, you'll get a chance. So we won't have a vote on this, but well, hey, just after this, Edwin, there's a couple of questions. Could you also answer the question that was directed to you on the role of the current Iraqi government?
Well, if I continue on the same thing, if we're talking about the Iraqi government, I don't think there is a partner in the Iraqi government. The Maliki was responsible for a lot of the problems that happened in Iraq, but Maliki was not alone. Maliki was not only in charge of the corruption. There were Sunnis, Kurds, and Shia part of the corruption. And those three different elements are still there in the Iraqi system. So the whole system of Iraq now is built on corruption. The Iraqi constitution is brilliant. There is a potential of solving the problems. There's a fantastic law to give resources to the governors. So that can be a good solution to solving the Sunni problem. But the problem is the problem of corruption, of culture. The Iraqi security forces are responsible for so much atrocities. They're not much different from the Syrian security forces. So Iraq is not yet, yes, Abadi is making all the right noises, it's fantastic, he's talking to the Sunnis, it's brilliant. But the culture of corruption is still there. The security forces are still detaining, torturing people. How can we have a solution? If the Sunnis of Ramadi think of the Iraqi army as an occupation force, you don't have a partner in the Iraqi army.
Okay, then we go to Edwin Bakker. I'm sure you would like to pick up on this, but if you can also include, well, the question that was asked about the Kurds and the risk, and also the one about the military supplies, military-industrial complex, as it used to be called in the old days.
Yeah. There was a US president who was warning us about that, wasn't he? After he stepped, after his end of his government. Going back to the issue like small problems, etc., then you have to accept all parties and discuss issues with all parties, including the Assad regime, and leaving that regime out of the equation, I think, is very strange and not very helpful. And I know that it's not a thing, politically correct to say that, but it's an important player. Whether you like it or not, he is not maybe backed, but a lot of people have some trust in at least this force, because the alternative is horrible for a number of people. And I think that is something that a lot of Western powers, and also now if you look at the whole rhetoric and the narrative of also the US president, is this Assad as some kind of, as the only evil in the region. You have to be careful, and also after listening to your remarks, I think it's time to reconsider our absolute position with regard to the Assad regime. We have to be very careful there, and I think it was not a wise decision to say, well, we're never going to talk with that person anymore. We're dealing with all kinds of parties, and maybe one day we even have to talk to IS, although I'm not in favor of that. Because there's so many IS, so some elements of IS and some elements of regimes. Well, to ask the question about the assessment of the risk and that it will spread to other places, well, it's already, there's already a connection there between Libya and Syria. In fact, if you talk about regional powers doing something, I remember Egypt and the United Arab Emirates also being active in Libya, military, and I'm not sure, they probably had some help of the US, but they do sometimes act together. But there is this risk. IS is in many ways also a social movement. But there's so many names and coalitions, but it is already there. And of course, a lot of these countries are very worried that whatever is going to happen in Syria and Iraq, that one day these people will not accept it to go back. I mean, as a lot of foreign fighters who went to Afghanistan in 1980s and 90s, they're not welcomed back home. So there is this potential of maybe 12,000 fighters. Some might die, but where will the rest go? And some will try to go home and connect what's happening in Syria and Iraq with what's happening in their own country. But it's already taken place. Fortunately, not so much in Tunisia, although they're also extremely worried about that. But in Libya, already this is taking place. Military industry complex. I think the situation is now so complex that you cannot speak of a complex anymore. But if you look at the weapons that are with which the various forces are fighting, it's bullets from Dnipropetrovsk, it's Kalashnikovs from Perm, it's I don't know, mines from Iran, it's weapons, Humvees from the United States. I mean, there's so many parties and so many different types of weapons that are sent to these places that you cannot speak of, let's say, a complex in the sense that there is some force that is providing them with weapons. They come from so many different places, through so many different actors, that it's actually a quite chaotic market. But of course, Russians, Americans, Iranians, they all pour in weapons, and without the weapons it's very difficult. On the other hand, it's not, fortunately, still not high-tech war, and they can do already a lot of trouble, cause a lot of trouble with a number of Kalashnikovs.
Okay, thank you. We go now to the balcony, but I also have a question here I received by Twitter, so we'll also get to that. But please, upstairs.
Hello, my name is Emma Beelaerts. I'm a master's student at the University of Amsterdam. I have a question about the discussion surrounding Westerners, Europeans going to the Middle East and fighting there. Because there are also a lot of Westerners that join the Israeli army and fight the battle for the Israeli army. And I was wondering why they are not part of the discussion about people going to the Middle East and also committing crimes.
Okay, thanks very much. Is there someone else there raising his hand? Back there.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Paul Arman. The situation in Syria, Iraq, and so on and so forth is far too complicated for me as a simple economist to comment on intelligently. When I listen to the, if I may say so, rather brilliant interventions by Mr. Maher and Mr. Abdul-Ahad, only serve to increase my anger, my emotion, and my moral confusion. So I'd move to an area, and you've been asking, Chairman, about what can we, the West, Netherlands, do. I move to an area that I vaguely understand.
Is there a question
and that's
coming
economics,
up?
Yes. The question is to Edwin Bakker.
All right.
What happens in geopolitical terms if we triple our oil and gas prices in our own countries? If we decrease dramatically our 600 billion a year that we subsidize traditional sources of energy, and so on and so forth? What kind of geopolitical impact will that have on the situation? Because if there's anyone around here who should have a comment on that, that should be you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. There was sort of a statement packaged into a question. Okay, we'll deal with that. We go where are the ladies with the mics? Okay, over there. And then we'll move there after that.
Hi, my name is Cecilie Inzinger. I'm also unaffiliated. I have a question for Mr. Maher and Ghaith. You talked about different factions fighting each other, and you talked about foreign fighters, but can you explain to me, or perhaps to us, what is IS exactly? I mean, who are they? I understand they're foreign fighters, but is it an entity, or is it, are there mainly Syrians and Iraqis, or are there women? Mr. Bakker talked about 12,000 fighters. Who are they actually?
Who are they? Okay. I think we all have a similar question there in the back. Yeah. I see some hands there.
Yep. Hello, my name is Jan Jensma, and I'm a student at Leiden University studying international relations. And I have a question for Shiraz Maher. which is about these foreign fighters coming back to Europe. Apparently there's 260 of them in the UK, 135 here in the Netherlands. Do domestic intelligence agencies have the capability to track so many people at the same time? And as an expert on radicalization, what would, in detail, a de-radicalization program look like? Besides offering them mental help, what can we do for them? They're probably very, I would imagine, very disillusioned. They hope to go there to help the Syrian people. And they come into a massive war zone where, with war crimes being committed on all sides. If you could comment on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We take one more question in the back here. We'll get to you in another round, maybe. There at the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Oli Buehler, and I work for the Dutch Foreign Ministry. My question is for Shiraz Maher. You spoke in your very interesting and informative talk about the fighters, those that have gone and those that have returned. But I would like to hear something, if possible, about those that are about to go. Because what I really find mind-boggling is that young men that were born in this country.
What was the question exactly?
That's coming up right now.
Okay.
Okay. Those that were born here, grew up here, went to universities here or schools here, still find the alternative of fighting in Syria a better alternative than living here. What could you have to say about that from your experience as from the Jihad on our doorstep inside the Minds of Jihadis?
Okay, thank you. We go now to the panel, and I'll just throw in a question received via Twitter by a certain I. Morse. I don't know if he's in the audience. Justice and peace are not always in balance. What should the West focus on? Not sure if justice and peace are a contradiction, but anyway. We'll leave it up to the panel. There's quite a few questions about foreign fighters. Let's start with that. Can I give it to you, Shiraz?
So, I'll start with the issue of the returnees, and can they all be tracked? No, is the simple answer to that. We've seen the ability of intelligence agencies being very stretched, and it's worth saying they do a very good job, but they are incredibly stretched with the demands being made on them, and to throw Syria into the mix of everything that's been happening post 9/11 is really stretching them very far indeed. I also think that they all came rather late to this issue. Foreign fighters were going from the end of 2012 to the start of 2013, but at least in the British context, I don't think there was any momentum, any serious thinking about this issue until really the last quarter of last year. So they've only really been looking at this for about a year, and so they've been very slow to react to the issue. What should a DRAD program look like? You know, it's a great question. I think there should be a form of compulsory de-radicalization. So it should be some sort of secure site that these individuals have to submit to. And I think ultimately, look, a lot of them, or all of them, have in fact at some level broken the law, have engaged in criminality. So some kind of deal needs to be struck, some sort of pardon in return for cooperation that leads to active intelligence, that leads to us gaining a better insight about the threat. But I accept this is a very, very difficult issue to resolve. Some of the key questions, and I'll throw these out as questions because it's very difficult to give a prescriptive answer, what governments would need to consider is who delivers that de-radicalization program. If you look at the schemes that currently exist in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, and so on, that they're state-run, and those are governments or countries that have the ability or the authority to act as states to interject into an Islamic debate. The West can't do that in quite the same way. So who will deliver this program? And what would the terms of it be? How will it be delivered? And more importantly, what's the criteria by which we're going to attempt to judge whether someone has been de-radicalized? And on the flip side of that, what do we do? What is the consequence for someone who's deemed to have failed? So I accept, as much as I've been talking about practicalities, particularly whilst arguing with Ghaith on the previous issues, this is one that needs a lot of discussion. It needs a lot of thought. My point was to say, and as I said repeatedly to the British government, it's very belated to be thinking about this now. The people are already here. The horse is already bolted. You're trying to catch it. But if you are going to catch it, you need to still be thinking about how you bolt that stable door. And And then why do people go to Syria from the West? Again, is a huge question. But what I would say is, look, for quite some time now, across Europe as a whole, even before 9/11, there has been, for quite some time, a certain strain of radical political Islam that has been practiced, that has been spread, and whose ideas have become entrenched within a minority, it must be said it's a minority, but within a minority of European Muslim life. There are people, as it was mentioned, groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, Al-Muhajirun, all these various groups in Germany, Millatu Ibrahim, who have been for a long time, certainly with their figureheads, these groups may have changed their names, but certainly the message they've spread, one of Khilafah, one of disengaging from European society, of not integrating, of being detached citizens, that has taken root for quite some time. And those ideas have been spread for quite some time. So you could have people growing up in these societies who are, as you rightly point out, taking full advantage or benefiting from everything that the West has to offer by way of education, opportunity, aspiration, but they still feel like semi-detached citizens. And by virtue of feeling semi-detached, the pull is greater to someone in Raqqa than it is to someone in Rotterdam. And that's the point, because they're fellow citizen stranger in the way that you have a sense of civic duty. If you see someone fall over in the street, you want to help them or something like that. Their sense of civic duty is not to their fellow citizen stranger in the nation in which they reside, but within the ummah to which they subscribe. So, as I say, Raqqa matters more than Rotterdam in that kind of context. And I'll just make one very quick point off the back of this, and then I'll stop, which is this. When the war in Bosnia happened, I remember being a young British Muslim growing up in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. There was a narrative that got spread that said, okay, look, the West isn't doing this, but the West doesn't care when Muslim blood is spilled. The West doesn't care when Muslims are oppressed. The West is kind of quite happy to see this. Now, that doesn't radicalize people in the sense of them wanting to undertake a terrorist act in the UK, for example. But what it does do is it sows a seed of doubt that makes them semi-detached. It says, this government doesn't really like me. It doesn't like me because of who I am, because of what I believe in. And so these people are already starting to drift away from the society and the state in which they live. And so, we talk a lot about the radicalization of foreign policy. War in Iraq, it radicalized lots of people. But there's also radicalization of a mission. And so now you see the same thing happening in Syria. Oh, the West is quite happy to see Muslims die in Syria. The West doesn't care even when Assad used chemical weapons against the people. It's a red line, but they allowed it to happen. So you're seeing a new generation of kids, a whole new generation growing up with that same thing. I call it the Bosnia effect, which is to distance themselves from the state. And so in the next war, those will be the people who will be going off to fight, wherever that is, because they haven't felt part and parcel of the societies in which they live.
Thanks very much for those comments. Yes. Oh, good enough, huh? Then we go to Edwin. Let's see if you draw some applause with your comments.
No, I'm not sure.
You must have some fans here in the audience. Come on. There were a couple of questions, I think, for you. The one was a question, sort of statement about, I think, if I understood it well, but probably you understood it better than I, about oil, the price of oil and gas and tripling and stuff, and what the effect on geopolitics would be. And then we had a question, what is IS exactly?
Yeah.
And if you can say that in 1 or 2 minutes?
I think there was another question about different groups going, people with Israeli passport joining
yeah, there was another
army.
one, yeah.
Yeah, in general, a lot of, this phenomenon that people from different countries join a fight somewhere else is of course not new. People from this country and from this city went to join the battles in Spain and during the Civil War. Actually, I had an uncle who went there. He lost his passport, by the way. Yeah, when he came back, that was a problem. They were not allowed when they asked these people to come home. This is the reintegration of the Dutch foreign fighters in the 1930s. When they came back, the police was there to check on the communists because they were not allowed to sing the International. So they sang "Zie ginds komt de stoomboot." So that's how he returned, but he lost his passport and got it back after the Second World War. So we know how to deal with these kind of things.
We don't go into the Sinterklaas discussion.
No, I'm sorry.
So, okay.
Anyway, so it's not new, and so there are more people that have a link. We have a very multinational society with a lot of people who have dual citizenship and dual loyalties, and some are to nations, some to the Ummah. Israelis with an Israeli passport who join the Israeli army, that is perfectly legal from, according to the Dutch law. You're allowed to join the country of which you own also another passport. Turkish citizens have to go into the Turkish army. But the big distinction is if you join a non-state actor. And I must say that one of the sad things in recent weeks in the Netherlands is that we've said those that go to Syria and then to certain groups, those are terrorists or criminals or whatever. If you join Free Syrian Army, it's different. Why would that be different? Maybe because we recognize it as a state. And we also said we're not going to stop Kurds that join a Kurdish militia. I mean, yeah, that is difficult. And I think my line is, you know, the monopoly of violence to the state, and everybody who joins a non-state actor or non-state entity, we should be very strongly reject that. But there are a number of people that just simply have to go into an army of their nation, of which they also hold a citizenship, and that's no problem to me. About the link between, I guess, energy and conflict. And
good summary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Energy and conflict. What if we would be less hooked on, let's say, oil from the Middle East? Well, the United States president has made several statements about it. His alternative is shale gas. I'm not sure if that's the option you prefer. But it suggests that we should not be, or we should be less dependent on oil or energy sources from areas of conflict or areas that force us into a certain foreign policy which we maybe not like and get involved into conflicts. But the same holds for gas from Russia, etc. I'm very much in favor of a Energiewende, just to say it in German, because I think that's the only country that was really going into that direction, for geopolitical reasons, for environmental reasons, and I think that will give us more options in our foreign policy. But nonetheless, it would not make a difference if you see some of these pictures, and it maybe brings me to the tweet about justice and peace. I mean, we do not, and I think at this moment, I think that maybe some of you would disagree. We don't send 6 F-16 fighters because of oil. And there's a lot of people always say it's oil, 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 oil. I don't think so. There are other things at stake as well. But of course, our options in our foreign policy will increase if we are less dependent on certain countries where certain conflicts take place. So I'm in favor of an Energiewende, and I would like to pay maybe not 3 times as much, but a little bit more.
So you did draw some applause. You used a tongue twister, oil, oil. Well, okay, I have difficulty with that. Ghaith, would you like to add something to this?
IS. What is IS?
What is IS? I think, you know, Shahrazad can answer this better. But what I would like to, where did IS come from? I don't think IS is a new invention. I mean, I've said this earlier. I don't think it just emerged in the last year and a half. It had its roots in the Iraqi version of Al-Qaeda. It had its roots before that. But in terms of the foreign fighters fighting, I remember in 2012 I was in Aleppo and there were a bunch of Chechens. You know, they were calling themselves Turks, but they were Chechens, there was a Saudi, there were Egyptians, and they were all fighting there. But at that time, they were not evil guys. You know, they were not even condemned by the way. They were allowed to go in and fight. Now, eventually, the Chechens became the nucleus of the Jaish al-Muhajirin. Jaish al-Muhajirin allied itself, and Ammar Shishani arrived and became all part of big IS. So, what is IS? I personally don't think it is one monolithic, you know, concept. It is a hardcore of an organization that had its roots in Al-Qaeda probably, or something else. But around that, we have, you know, 50 or 70 shades of gray of different multitude of units fighting for different causes. Some are local, some are international. The description of, you know, Shahrazad was brilliant about why people go there and fight. And this is also true about the foreign fighters fighting there, but it's also very true about the locals fighting there. Why do they fight for IS? You know, they're the good guys. They're the tough guys on the block. They're the people who are actually managed to achieve a victory in a Middle East long history of defeats. You want to associate yourself with something that is giving you power. So there are so many different reasons, and I think part of the mistake that's happening in this whole argument now is thinking, or at least from the American kind of perspective, thinking of IS as this one solid organization, you know, coming, marching down from the
So we now...
Can I just very quickly add...
1 minute, because I just would like to give some others opportunity. Yeah? Or you...
I'll do in 30 seconds.
Okay.
It's just to pick up on Ghaith's point about it not being a monolith, is that it really is, to use a military term, it's like, it operates like a force multiplier. It will take existing battalions, existing groups, and say, look, we have money, we have resource, we can give you capacity, give us bayah, and we will help you, provided you fight in terms and in line with our objectives. And so it has the ability to scale up very rapidly and then to scale down again as needs be. And I think that feeds in entirely with what Ghaith is saying.
I have to disagree.
One soundbite.
One soundbite. Also to add to that, it's different from Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, which was a very strong, hardcore organization, monolithic. IS in a certain way is very similar to the Taliban, which had a core and then allowed itself to build different networks of fighters.
Okay, thanks for this nuance. We go to another round of questions.
We have one more question on the balcony at the right.
On the balcony?
Right. Yes.
Oh, okay, up there.
All right, thank you. My name is Eric Stelwagen. I'm unaffiliated. I have more of a personal question.
No one is affiliated in this whole hall. How is that possible?
It's more of a personal question for Mr. Shiraz Maher. You were part of a jihadist movement. I wondered what attracted you to this movement and what made you fall from your belief.
Okay, I've been neglecting this group, but if there's no hands, then it's okay. No, there's no hands here, and then we move to, well, we first move to the gentleman over here.
My name is Bashar al-Bandar from the Embassy of Iraq. I noticed that our distinguished speakers, they did not actually mention that there is a sectarian war actually going there. What is the main motivation for a group like ISIS going to fight for Syria? The meaning of jihad in Islam, it means the holy war against the disbelievers, the unbelievers. But in Syria and also in Iraq, we see the way they talk.
Sorry, you know I'm a little bit strict even on you, my good friend. Can we have a question?
Yes, my question comes. We have been following the newspapers here in the Netherlands regarding people going to join ISIS, some of them in The Hague, in other parts of the Netherlands. My question is, those people, what is the role of the Dutch institutions to actually enlighten them, to show them that they are not going to fight for a real cause after all these atrocities we are witnessing?
Okay, thanks very much. That's clear, sort of. Then we move to that section. I see the gentleman over there who's looking in a very sympathetic way at me, so I have to give him
Thanks. My name is Paolo Zaro. I'm Pershing in Master in International Relations, Webster University in Leiden. And the question is to Mr. Maher, going back to the domestic jihadist, is to what extent the Muslim community in Europe could do something about it. And very shortly, I think that you said, if I understood correctly, we are too late. We should have done something in Syria. I bet that if we have done something in Syria, like many other times, many people would be on the street to complain about this. There is always a reason to complain. So people are ready to complain when Israel attacks Gaza. I haven't seen anybody to demonstrate against the fact that in Syria there were 100,000 people dying. So my question is, can the Muslim community do something more to avoid the radicalization and to help the de-radicalization
That's very
of
clear.
the
It's
people?
sort of a call
Thanks.
for demonstrations. I can't support that from here, of course. We go there, the gentleman over there with the glasses. Yeah. And a nice jacket.
Yeah,
Could you stand up, please?
I'm Yunus Lutfullah Kurt from Iraq. My question is to Mr. Abdul-Ahad. Do you think that the problem in the area can be solved by the people of the government itself in the area, or should be the support from the international community? And if you think that it should be some support, which kind of support should be to solve the problem in the area? And do you think also that's a very old area that get a new life cycles? Because this not a problem of the ISIS, it's a problem of the ideology, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. Very smart. He asked 3 questions and strung them together. Let me see. Anyone waving fanatically? I think I see a lady there in a red pullover. It's always good to wear something bright when you want to ask a question.
Thank you. Marloes van Noordloo, Tilburg University. I have a question for Mr. Maher. So you spoke about the role of social media. In the UK, it's a criminal offense to glorify terrorism. In the Netherlands, there's been a party advocating to make this a criminal offense here as well. And I wonder, do you think this is a solution, or how has this worked in the UK so far? Thank you.
Okay, then one last question for this round. Yeah, way in the back. I mean, you can hardly see anything, so at least you can ask a question.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Eric Post. I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, although I'd like to see myself as being unaffiliated. And also, let me repeat what Ernesto said in the beginning. None of these viewpoints represent any official part of the ministry, but are solely my own.
Okay, your question.
Well, I'm curious, and Mr. Maher and Edwin Bakker, why are we still considering boots on the ground, bombing, arming, sending ammunitions? We've tried this in the past, at least in Korea, Afghanistan 1, Afghanistan 2, Iraq 1, Iraq 2, Libya, Burma, etc. We know this doesn't help. Why are we doing this if it doesn't address any of the root causes? That's the question.
Okay. Well, you did mention Korea, huh? But I think we have to go back to the history books to see that it did have some effect there, I believe. Might be mistaken. Then we go to the panel here. We have quite a number of questions for Shiraz. I hope you remember them.
I've written them down.
You're better than I. Okay, please, go ahead.
I'll take them in the order they came. So, in a nutshell, why did I join Hizb ut-Tahrir? Why did I leave it? I mean, wow, it's a big question. We could be here all night. So I'll give you the real kind of bite-sized version. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I was there during the Gulf War for a little bit, and then we left. But the point was, afterwards, I noticed a real sort of a discussion, public discussion about politics that never used to take place in Saudi Arabia. And that discussion was about the role of non-Muslims, particularly of the United States, having military bases on the Arabian Peninsula, on Jazirat al-Arab, in terms of, is this allowed? Is it forbidden in Islam? And to put it bluntly, the overriding view in Saudi Arabia was that this is absolutely forbidden. And so there was a real sense of hostility towards the United States, the view that the United States was a malignant power within the Muslim world, and that this was a power attempting to colonize Muslims in the way that the British had done so previously. And so that didn't really change much for me, other than the fact that it's in my head. But when September the 11th happened, I immediately connected the dots, and I said, okay, this is payback, this is blowback. I'll be very honest in saying at the time, my genuine opinion was that the United States deserved it. And so what happened was that I went to the mosque. I was not a practicing Muslim, I was basically an atheist on September the 11th, but I wanted to know what Islam said about this issue. And I was a young man at the time, and I'm also struggling with these issues of identity and where do I fit into society. I went to the mosque, met some members of Hizb ut-Tahrir who were very eloquent, very intelligent, had a panacea solution, just like the people who are interested and attracted to the Islamic State today. It's a one-size-fits-all solution, khilafah. It will resolve all the problems of the Muslim world. So, for a young man, that's a pretty seductive thing. And all the things I see playing out today with the people who go and join the Islamic State were the very things that attracted me to join Hizb ut-Tahrir. There's a new history that's about to be made. The United States is about to launch a war on Islam. We can defend Islam. We can defend Muslims against Islam. We need to be part of this new history. So you want to be part of that. If you're not a young man who wants to take over the world, there's something wrong with you. This is basically part and parcel of being a kid. So I joined the Hizb at that point. And that's what took me in a very dogmatic fashion. It was really the politics of the moment rather than the religious aspect.
But I think the question was also, why did you leave?
Yeah, so why did I leave? Okay, I became very religious within the movement, though. It should be said. And when I left is basically the fact that after 4 years of being in the group, I began to start to read more broadly. I wasn't just reading Hizbi books or the sort of other Islamist books from Qutb or Ma'dudi. I began to read more broadly what Islamic theorists had said. And once you begin to challenge dogma by looking at plurality, by accepting shades of grey, by accepting nuance, you don't have to believe in all the other things. You just have to accept that there exists a middle ground. And once you realize that, you realize dogma and fanaticism has to collapse in and of itself, and it's very, very fragile. And so for me, it was very dramatic, it was very sudden, but I realized I had to leave the Hizb because I couldn't subscribe to a view of Islam that was binary, that was us versus them, that was Muslim, non-Muslim, Dar al-Kufr, Dar al-Harb, and these kinds of things. It was very simple that Islam is a huge thing, and it has many currents within it, and you can find your own sort of way within. And so I came out of the Hizb. Just to give you a very quick answer to that. What can the Muslim community do was the second question. What more can the Muslim community do to resolve the issue of foreign fighters? Well, look, I think the Muslim community today, I speak about Britain because I don't know the European situation so well, but the British one I do know. We're in a very different place to where we used to be in the immediate aftermath of September the 11th. The Muslim community is now a lot more aware of these issues. It's a lot more guarded. It has really built capacity in the old kind of organizations or institutions. Look at Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example. It's finished in the UK. It doesn't exist. It doesn't have the power that it used to have before. Groups like Muhajirun don't have the power they used to have. So there has been community pushback. But I think Syria was very unique, was very exceptional in a number of cases. One is the sense that all these guys who are going, they're going completely without any input from their parents, from the mosque. They get up and they go, and it happens very dramatically because of the role of social media, which was one of the other questions that was asked at one point. So it's the potency of that effect that makes them go. The other thing is, it was a lot harder. You could make a case before, say, well, look, you're British. You're angry about the fact that British troops are in Iraq fighting this war. That's okay. Be angry. Be very angry. Write to your MP, lobby Parliament, demonstrate. You could try and engage them in civic kind of activity. But in the Syrian context, it's very difficult to put up a counter-narrative, particularly in the early stages, against the brutality of the Assad regime. And the point was, it wasn't just Muslims that were angry. The Western world was saying, Assad is a tyrant. Western governments, we've been discussing it, said, this guy has to go. We're never going to do business with him. We're never going to talk to him again, which personally I think is the right position to hold. I disagree with Edwin on that we should talk to him. He should never be spoken to. But that was the reality of what took place. So it was very difficult to put a counter-narrative. Now you can put a counter-narrative. You can say to these guys, okay, you want to go to Syria, you want to fight in this, who are you going to fight? You're going to fight Jabhat al-Nusra? You're going to fight Ahrar al-Sham? Like, what is it that you're going to be part of? You're going to spend most of your time fighting other rebel groups. And you can sow the seeds of doubt in the minds of these guys about what they're doing. And then the final question was on the glorification of terrorism law in the UK. It's a very vague law. With all criminal public prosecutions, there's the public interest test. And based on that public interest test, there's been very, very few prosecutions based around the glorification of terrorism. So if your question really was how effective has it been, I would say not very.
Okay, then I move to Edwin. I think you could take the question on the role of Dutch institutions that was asked. Yeah.
So Dutch institutions, do they tell them they're wrong? Well, it's very difficult for the Dutch state to tell them they're wrong, and I think they do in a way, and maybe they've taken too long. I mean, law enforcement is, of course, a way to tell you you're wrong. And there have been a number, and that has taken a while before we've seen some arrests of people who were glorifying this fight, maybe even recruiting, etc. And in my eyes, it took a very long time before there was this clear signal to say no to that. There's a wide range of measures you can take. A very symbolic one is to take away passports. I think whether it works in court, in front of court, will stand in front of court, I doubt, but it's a strong signal. That's one thing that the state can do, saying, well, this is a crime. And although some people disagree with certain statements, but these have to be made by law enforcement agencies. So that's one way to tell them they're wrong. But the counter-narrative is up to the parents, it's up to the communities, because the authorities are not a credible partner here or a credible spokesperson. They should stay neutral in this state where religion and state are separated. So that's up to the communities. But the state, by way of law enforcement, has to draw the line. And I've been quite firm on that. I think we should have drawn the line earlier and have been clear about a number of people. You cross that line and you have to face the serious consequences, because the stuff you're doing is very serious as well. And there has been a lot of reluctance there, and I think a lot of people now looking back at it are sorry we didn't do that before, and I think you might agree on that. We have let this go too long. Then there was another question earlier about we do not work on root causes. Well, I'm not sure what the root causes are. I think this is already a highly complex conflict. Tell me what the root causes are. I'm not sure. And if we want to work on that, how long can you work on that and let everything happen? You gave some examples that didn't work. I'm not sure they didn't work. I heard a number of cases. I'm not sure what the alternative was. You know, a North Korea or Korea People's Republic that stretches all the way to Busan. That would not be my idea. And if we take Bosnia or take recent case of Mali, I'm very happy that there are a number of forces like the French, together, by the way, with regional forces like Chad and Mali, talking about local partners not being able to do something. If the Chadian army, I'm not sure if you pronounce it that way, and the Nigerian army can do something, I'm actually quite surprised how they manage. So Mali, northern Mali, is an example, a very recent example that gives me some hope that there are cases where violence can stop certain groups. And then still, it needs a lot of other policies as well to deal with some of the root causes or other causes. But violence, just denouncing violence as an option, I think is not an option for me.
Now, on this positive note, I think we go to Ghaith. There was a question on whether the problem could be solved by people in the area, in the region, or you need outside support, basically, intervention.
I mean, whenever I'm asked about the people in the area can solve the problem and the people outside, I think, yes, of course, the international community is a fundamental partner in this, but it has to work in different ways. So not only by, working on Assad or working on the ISIS solving the problem, but also working on the root causes of the problem. I mean, there are very not easy, but there are very basic solutions that you can work on. In 2013, early 2013, the Sunnis of Iraq were demonstrating. Yes, of course, they were infiltrated. Yes, of course, they had Ba'athis. Yes, of course, they had certain elements of Al-Qaeda with them. But they were demonstrating. I mean, when was the last time the Sunnis of Ramadi were demonstrating in history? So that was a possible moment where a solution could have been found. So I think isolating the Sunnis of Iraq, the cause of the frustrations of the Sunnis of Iraq, from the causes of ISIS. Another thing, the Sunnis of Iraq for 2 years were fighting or demonstrating or kind of raising their voices against the Iraqi government, which is, Shia. So, in Syria, there was also a Sunni insurgency really across the border, but there was never a mixture of these two civil wars or these two conflicts. The Sunnis of Ramadi didn't go to Deir ez-Zor, or Deir ez-Zor didn't come. It's only when ISIS just did the sweeping attack on Mosul, suddenly the two conflicts became one conflict. And suddenly, of course, the Sunnis of Iraq decided to make another strategic mistake of kind of joining hands with ISIS. But the two conflicts are not the same. Separating them is a way. And this is something for the international community to go work and find a solution and broker a sort of settlement in Iraq. And I think this is how we can partner between. But to go and just pay money and create another militia, I agree with you about monopoly of power and of violence. To create another militia of a Sunni Iraqi militia that would go fight ISIS on your behalf, I don't think that's a solution that can, lead anything.
Now, I think we're coming to an end, but something I've not done before, which is if no one has to catch a train somewhere else, is afraid to miss it, I will allow for 2 more last very short questions, which has to be 1 sentence without commas. The lady behind, at the back.
Hi, I'm Cecile Landman. I did for about 10 years a network with Iraqi bloggers. I saw your first blog, I think, some time ago. But my question is about Turkey. What is the role of Turkey in
What's the
all
role of
this?
Turkey? Thanks very much. That's 1 sentence. 1 question. Then I allow for 1 last one. I think I saw one here. There, the gentleman over there. So that has to be the best question of the night. Huh? big responsibility.
My name is Vincent Vrijhoef. I'm the one behind the tweet earlier. My question is for Ghaith. Don't you think ISIS will collapse because of the internal struggles and the differences in what they want to achieve? ISIS consisting of different entities.
Okay, thanks very much. So that's the very active Twitter person. So we first go to the question on Turkey and then to the last question whether ISIS will collapse, because maybe we have a positive sort of ending on that, maybe not. So, question the role of Turkey, very short, a short statement.
I think Ghaith would do.
You live in Turkey.
I live in Istanbul, but I think
the
very
role
short.
of Turkey.
2 lines.
They're playing a dangerous game. They have allowed a lot of things to happen on their side of the border, and they have already witnessed a number of attacks. And I think we should be a little bit tougher on Turkey, saying, you know, what you're doing, you're allowing all these people on the other side of the border to facilitate foreign fighters. Why don't you do more? Turkish will say, why don't you do more to make sure that less people are going? What do you do about PKK? So they probably always have this counter argument, but this is not a time to play these kind of games. They should be, and they are possible to do a lot more to make sure that these people don't get so easily to Syria. And to give you an example, just one thing. One thing. I'm really outrageous. There's this student of mine. His brother is going to Syria. It's right in the newspapers, and the guy can just go by car all the way to Syria. How on earth is that possible? You drive all the way to Turkey. I'm sorry, but maybe that's because I'm close to this guy. But the Turks should do a lot more.
Thanks very much. And Ghaith, please.
Well, yesterday we were joking, me and Shiraz, about, you know, what would happen if the Islamic State kind of established an actual Islamic State. And I think the first thing they would do, as any typical Middle Eastern country, is they split and fight each other. So I think this is a potential, you know, because the Islamic State are made of all these different forces, these different elements. The moment there is a context, you know, the kind of the leadership is debated. The Khalifa is not a Khalifa. There is another Khalifa. Then you see a split between different elements. So I don't think it is a state of institutions. So yes, possibly that is a very possible thing. It will split, but splitting is not a positive thing, because there was one Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan in 2001, and now the ideology of Al-Qaeda spread all the way from Nigeria to Malaysia. So splitting the Islamic State may not be your best option, but it is a quite possible thing.
And then we end with a final comment by Shiraz.
Well, actually, on that front, then, actually, maybe I'm going to be the optimist rather than the pessimist. I don't think it would break up, actually. I think they do self-purify. The issue yesterday was, when we were discussing, saying, give them time. They have institutions set up. Those institutions will mature over time. They've set up an alternative civil society and provision of services. So I actually think the Islamic State, it kills its opponents, and that allows it to self-purify. It is... by its own admission, it says its successes have been a result of the fact that it's more disciplined than its opponents. It operates a more rigorous structure. I know we talked about this kind of diffuse elements around the edge, but the core is very much the core, and it is strong, it is united, it is quite unprecedented, actually, in terms of what they've achieved. So I think it is here, it is definitely going to persevere and persist for quite some time, that if we reconvened in 5 years, there'll still be an Islamic State of some sort that will exist in some shape or form.
Now, thanks very much. We're not going to applaud that, because I don't think that's a very positive outlook, and I will just hold your applause, because I would like to thank first the Rode Hoed. I would like to thank the ladies who were walking around with the microphones, and all the other colleagues who helped, and especially Aminata Kone, who really organized all of this. Please, a warm round of applause for all the people who did big work. And if possible, even a bigger applause for the speakers of tonight, Shiraz. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Now we'll see you again in 2 months. You will get a notice. Everyone is on the mailing list now, and many more. And some of you have been waiting for it, or maybe came specially for that. I hope not, but the bar is open. See you there.
Shiraz. I was so tempted to say Bakker.
I was going to say Bakker, and then I thought, if I say it, you have the option.
Eén seconde, ja.